Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A good tavach, a good week. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer Tanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC and is in honor and memory of Rabbi Yosef Halevi Weinberg Olav Shalom, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKohen Katz Olav Shalom, Rabbi Yael HaKohen Khan Olav Shalom. It's also in schus and merit of Rabbi Zev Yecheskel HaKohen and Risha Katz La'erich Yomim B'Shanim Tevis for many long and healthy years. So we have concluded chapter 11 in Tanya, the chapter about the Rosha. So let's sum up what we've learned and go a little more into detail the last lines of the chapter, which contain a tremendous and fascinating paradox, as we'll discuss. So the theme of the chapter completely focused on the Rosha, just as chapter 10, the previous chapter, focused on the Tzaddik. Now we're focusing on the Rosha. And remember, these are names that are not just euphemisms people throw out the word. He's a tzaddik, he's a Rosha. These are the Alter Rebbe discussing the real mohus, the personality types, the archetypes. As he already laid at the ground in chapter 1, that we're not talking about the Shem HaMushal when we say it in a euphemistic way or as an expression. We're talking about actually defining an entity, a person. What is the barometer? So as a tzaddik, not just the word righteous, a tzaddik means his life is defined by what God wants of him, by the purpose of his existence. And all side distractions that would have been from the animal soul have been sublimated, have been controlled, have been eliminated to the point of total transformation in the tzaddik gomer, meaning even the animal soul is also now completely focused on the divine soul transformed. Both parts, both the right and left side of the heart, or na tzaddik she'eino gomer, tzaddik v'raloi, that there may be something still, hypothetically, somewhere, some iota, but it's completely sublimated. V'raloi, completely kaful for bottle. The Rasha, on the other hand, is someone like one of us. I know we say the word Rasha, we mean a cruel, wicked person, but Rasha really means someone whose life is defined not just by the animal soul. There's also another soul, another voice, as we learned at length earlier. A voice that is about your own survival. We're not even talking about necessarily something that is doing something prohibited or forbidden, but it's just not totally dedicated to Kedusha. Remember, we learned before in chapter 6 that what is Kedusha? Everything that's bottle, like he says in chapter 6. Let's just read it inside. A very powerful line where he says these words. God does not reside, does not rest, except in something that is bottle, that's completely dedicated to him. Whereas Sitra Achre, he explains there, is the opposite. It doesn't mean it's negative, it just means Sitra Achre, the other side, that's not the side of Kedusha. Piras Tzad Achre, Shein Tzad Kedusha. That it doesn't have that total dedication. You look at ourselves, that's how we were created. A tzaddik has worked on himself and also has a neshama of a tzaddik. But a Rasha is a person born with two voices, two kings that are trying to dominate and control the small city. Iktan Guv, the small city, which is the person's body and its citizens, the person's faculties, and there's a battle going on. The extent of the battle is determined on what level of the Rasha. So Rasha v'tevlei, which corresponds to the tzaddik v'ralei, is just like by a tzaddik, there's something, but there's something from the other voice that doesn't act in any way, not thought, speech, action. It's just not completely transformed because the Ava is not Gomor. It's not a Tzaddik Gomor. He doesn't have total, absolute, 100% love for the divine. So somewhere there's a potential, but that potential is completely sublimated and subjugated to Ra Loi, to the good in the tzaddik. So by the Rosh V'Tevlei, the same idea, that the Tev of the Nefesh Alekis is kaf and bottle because it is subjugated to some extent to the animal soul. Because the battle rages. The question is to what extent. So the Alter Rebbe chose, as we discussed at length, examples from both ends of the spectrum. Yeshmi, he said, someone who it has some effect, but it's infrequent, and even when it has an effect, it's not completely on the person, on the entire person, only in thought, only in speech and action, and even then lenient items, moderate items, not severe ones, as we discussed. Then Yeshmi, the other extreme, said the Yeshmi shara gave by Yeser Meslapshim by Kol Shleisha Levushim Shalara Umachtir Baveris Chamuris, that here it affects all the three garments, thought, speech, and action, and the sins that it transgresses are more severe ones. And it's more frequent. But nevertheless, he still has Rosh V'Tevlei because he still has the divine soul. And therefore he has Irhuri Tshuva in between, thoughts of Tshuva. However, at the end of the day, he's not eliminating the animal soul. So there's this constant battle. But here, in this case, in this end of the spectrum, there's more impact of the animal soul. And this is the majority of the Rishayim, the majority, tens of thousands of levels, and most people go into this category, depending on what extent. So even though he may not have the ability, or is not exercising the ability to completely dominate and eliminate the animal soul, but there are moments of tshuva. And like he says, that they have some form of regrets and remorse. Why? Because there's a good inside them. The regrets are coming from the good. So they harbor some good benafsham. And that's why it's called a Rosh V'Tevlei, because the Tev is causing him regrets, but it's light. It's kafuf for bottle. It's still subjugated to the other side, the animal soul. So even at times when we have inspiration, times, Yom Kippur, Shabbos, Rosh Hashanah, other times we have deep inspiration, and at that time you can say the animal soul is pretty much subdued, but it's not gone. So think of a city. It could be that the one side is winning, in this case the divine soul, but the other voice is still there. It may not be right now, but we know that it's existent and active. And the question is how active. That's all depends how you measure it. So there's toiv, benafsham, and it's expressed through regrets. But then comes Rosh V'Ralei, the completely the other end of the spectrum. And here it says, Ach mishein mischaret la'elam, someone that never regrets, doesn't feel any remorse, doesn't have any thoughts. It's interesting, he says both things. Remorse, charota, and doesn't have any thoughts of tshuva. We know when it comes to tshuva, there's charota ala ovar, kabbalah teva ala haba. So maybe that's what he's hinting. He doesn't have regrets over the past, which is necessary, and also accepting to doing positive going forward. In this case, einim mischaret le'elam, and he does not have thoughts of tshuva at all. And this renders him into the level of Rosh V'Ralei. Raloi, because they don't see a tev. There's no tev begoli. Doesn't even have a regret. There's no sign of a positive voice. It doesn't mean there's no divine soul there, God forbid. That never leaves. But by Rosh V'Tevlei, you say tev. There's good in him. However, it's subjugated. It's sublimated. Here, we say, Hu levade nisha bekirbe, ki gover kol kach ala tev. that his animal soul, meaning his survival, his existence, everything about him, is so dominant, it means that in many ways they're overwhelmed as if it departed from inside him. Now remember, departed doesn't necessarily mean it's not there. It means it doesn't have any revealed effect. And that's why he adds, to make it clear that we're not talking about completely gone, it's in a form of makif. Later in chapter 48 in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe is going to explain that makif does not mean outside of, it means it's not affecting, it's not revealed in the person. So that's what makif means. And when he brings a raya, makif alav milmaila, I should add. It's makif alav milmaila, from above, which tells us that point. In other words, it's there, but it's affecting him from above, not something that's active within the person. And the Alter Rebbe then says, "L'chein omer azal kol be'asor shchinta sharia." The river, there are 10. Over every 10, the divine presence rests. So on one hand, the focus here is rests sharia from the word makif. On the other hand, you can't say, meaning it's banished and not active within it, but you can't say it doesn't exist. Because let's say you take 10 people who are Rosh V'Rale. Can they be a minyan? Absolutely. Like sometimes the example is used that 9 Moshe Rabbeinus don't make a minyan. 10 Rosh Hashanah do. Because the neshama doesn't disappear. It's just not active. And that's the point here. So here you see the interesting, fascinating paradox. On one hand, it's clearly coming to tell us a person doesn't even have regrets. And yet, the Shekhinah still rests there. But it's makif. Now when you go back, for example, into chapter 6, I mentioned before, he actually brings there the same Maimer Chazal. And there he brings it regarding, just by reading back chapter 6, he says, that God does not rest sheira. Same idea, does not dwell, does not rest. Only something that's sublimated and surrenders and completely dedicated to him. Bein b'poel mamish, either in actuality, bein b'koyach b'chol ish Yisrael lamata. Kol ish Yisrael, every Jew lamata. Shebekeiach Eli is bottle mamish. He always has the power to be bottle. And that's why Lechein Omer Azal Shafila Ech Echad Sheyeshev Esek B'Teira Shechina Shruya V'Chol Bei Asar Shechinta Shari Le'elam. What's he saying? That even if right now act's not active, it's still there, b'koyach, b'power. And the answer is very clear, because what he's saying here is the same idea. It's makiv, but it doesn't mean it's not there. So it has an impact, as he explains in Likutei Torah, that it has an impact. Even in the case where it doesn't have an active effect right now, which also explains the Maimer Chazal, the end of Chagigah. It says, Fila Peishi Yisrael Malay Mitzvahs Karimin. Peishi Yisrael, they're filled with mitzvahs, meaning all Peishi Yisrael, even the Rosh V'Rale. But it's Malay Mitzvahs Karimin, the mitzvahs are not having an active impact on him, even though it could be there. Which explains also why it's like a rimin, like a pomegranate, that the seeds are separated by these membranes, because it's not internalized and integrated, as one explanation in the comparison. So what you see here is, even when we're talking the darkest scenario, it's still not in a way where you say, we said in the morning, does a Rosh V'Rale say Neshama Shenesata B'Tahirihi? Yes, because there is a Neshama there. You can never eliminate the Neshama. The question is how active it is. And that's the real kavanah, the real purpose of what he's saying here. Tzemach Tzedek, interestingly, when he on this piece on Tanya, when he makes the kitzur, a summary of this chapter, he says the words that kimeruba midateva. That's what he writes on the words where we say and let's explain what that means. So, to quote a letter from the Frierdiker Rebbe, he says, Ima yesha besibas rishay, even though by this Rosh Varale, due to his behavior, due to his selfishness, you can say, to his wickedness, meaning to his transgressions, Geirim Shatev Yistalik, we just said Yistalik. That's the Lashon of the Alter Rebbe. That Kolkach Gorav Achin Yistalik Mekirbein, and stands in a makif above him, hovers above him. But Kol Mokim Zeisu Chesed Elyon. This is the Chesed Elyon, the supernal Chesed, kindness from above. Shayistalkuzu Eine Sila Gomer Legamri. That this istalkus is not complete removal, complete banishment. V'kol v'kol, entirely. Ela shanishar b'bchinas makif. It remains in a form of makif. Like we mentioned, gam v'apum machtarta rachmona kari, just as an example. A ganer, before he goes to steal, he davens to God. How's that possible? God said, le signev. And yet he davens to God, because the munach, this explains, is makif. It's there, but it's not actively focused. It's not totally integrated. It's not a fake amunah. He does daven, sincerely. But he has that dissonance. So it's remained in a form of makif. So what is the Tzemach Tzedek coming to emphasize? He's coming to say, remember, we said, L'umazeh l'umazeh, the Rosha v'tevlei corresponds to the tzaddik v'rale. Right? That just like by the tzaddik, any smidgen, anything, any potential of Ra is completely sublimated and subjugated to the goodness. So corresponding to that, that the good in him is not totally dominant, it's subjugated to the animal soul, loy. Rasha v'tev loy. The tev is subjugated. So you would then say that who is corresponding to the tzaddik gomur or the tzaddik v'tev loy? That's the Rasha v'rale. If the Rasha v'tev corresponds to tzaddik v'rale, so the Rasha v'rale corresponds to the tzaddik v'tev. Just like a tzaddik v'tev, what dominates? Only good. Not only dominates, it's completely transformed the negative. And there's nothing left, there's no negative altogether. So you could say that tzaddik Rasha v'rale is the same thing in the other extreme. Completely dominated, like he said, that is completely dominated to the point. It's called Rasha v'rale. Shadashim nafshehu levadei nisha b'kirbei. What remains b'kirbei, b'pnimius, within him, active, is only the Ra. So Tzemach Tzedek says no. By the tzaddik v'tevle, you don't say something remains maki from the negative. It's completely been transformed because meruba midateva. But the truth is, meruba midateva really is talking about the Rasha v'rale. That when it comes to Rasha v'rale, as much as the Ra dominates and is taka banished the good, but meruba midateva, you can't say by Rasha v'rale that the good is completely gone. So it's makif from above. By tzaddik v'tevle, you don't say that the Ra is makif. You say it's completely been transformed. So that's a very important emphasis. Which also tells us a fundamental principle about good and evil. You know, people ask the question, you know, Mashiach, we know we're told Mashiach is going to come. But we're also told in the Torah, due to negative things we've done, we've been banished, we've been exiled. So who says that sins could accumulate and maybe the Gula keeps on being pushed off? God forbid. But the key thing to remember is that good and evil don't work the same way. Goodness is emes, and emes is eternal. Later we'll learn in Tanya that yichud zeh nitzchi le'elam v'od. L'mayla nitzchi, when a person does a mitzvah, the yichud, the unification, the energy that it generates is forever, and it accumulates. So all the good deeds, all the mitzvahs done over thousands of years accumulate and never disappear. Ra, on the other hand, is sheker. It's not real. The action may be real, but it doesn't generate an eternal energy. It's actually the opposite. It weakens, it's going against the very order and the purpose of existence. So it's really destructive. That does not accumulate. Once it's erased, it's erased. So we can't say that Raz also accumulates. Goodness has a superiority over the negative because it's aligned with godliness, with emes, elikim emes. And that's why Ra does not accumulate. A punishment, golus, eliminates the Ra. And we don't say, it keeps accumulating, because then you can have a situation where it's in Ledovasov, God forbid. So the good accumulates, the evil gets erased through the different ways that we've done tshuva, or yisurim, or the pains, or golus itself. They are metayr. They ultimately refine the person. And then the Ra is eliminated. So you could say, you see here, Tanya, that makes that point, essentially, because when it comes to good, the Shekhinah is always there, so it's not active. When it comes to evil, evil can be completely eliminated, which is by the Tzadik Gomer. And Losadova, when it's Ruach Hatuma Avim in Haaretz, and the spirit of toxins and impurities will be banished, will be eliminated from the world, the Yetzer Hara will be Shchitas, will be destroyed, and then it will be only eternal good. Good reflecting divine light, divine energy, Kedusha, Bittul. And that's eternal. Whereas the negative, even if it rears its ugly head, but it's a temporary thing, it doesn't have that type of permanence. And we see that here. That even the person doesn't have regrets, can you imagine? But he's still in the category of Shechinta Sharia, which ultimately does have an effect, and that's why we say, Lo yidach memenu nidach, that ultimately he too will do tshuva. Why? You just said it's been banished, because good can never disappear. That's the bottom line. It can't disappear. In different words, negative, the ra, or the negative, not doing what God wants, is an anomaly, is an aberration. So even though it can happen, but it's not something that's lasting. It doesn't have any lasting, sustainable power. Whereas good has sustainable power. So that adds a little more explanation to this idea of the Rasha. And with that, it concludes chapter 11. So we have here now the two extremes in Rasha v'Tevlei, how much it affects, minimal effect or maximum effect. And then finally, the other end of the spectrum, Rasha v'Ralei, where there's not even regrets or thoughts of tshuva. But the Tev is still there, a Shedam al-Maila. Because that can never disappear. It's such a tremendous lesson in hope for each one of us and for all our brothers and sisters, wherever they may be. The idea that no matter where a person is, it's a creation of God's. Hashem put him here, or her. And therefore they have a neshama, and by merit of that, by virtue of that, can always connect. There's no such thing as someone that's completely lost. It could be difficult, but there's always preserved that aspect. And yet, this does describe the level of a Rasha. So now that we finished chapter 10, Tzaddik, chapter 11, Rasha, in that itself, the Tzaddik v'Tevlei and the Tzaddik v'Ralei, or the Tzaddik Gomer, Tzaddik Shnei Gomer. And in chapter 11, Zelu Mazeh, Rasha v'Tevlei, Rasha v'Ralei. Now that we've established that, and that measures, that battle that he explained in chapter 9. So to sum up, chapter 1, he lays out the introduction and begins talking about the first of the two souls in the person, the animal soul. Chapter 2, 3, 4, 5 is the divine soul, its faculties and its garments. Chapter 6, 7, and 8 is about the animal soul and its faculties and garments, which sets the stage to chapter 9, pitted against each other in a perpetual battle. And 10 and 11 are two ways to measure it. Two general ways with specific details, tzaddik and Rosh. That measures what's going on with this battle. Who's winning the battle? Which king? The divine soul, the animal soul. Complete winning, almost complete. Or is there an equal battle and the animal soul is quite powerful? And that too, there are many levels. So you see here, the Alter Rebbe has laid out a true picture, a true formula of way of measuring our Aveda wherever you are. But the picture is not complete till the next chapter. Because from this he's going to go into the chapter on the Beinani. Remember, Tanya is called Sefer Shel Beinanim. The Beinani doesn't just mean, like he explained earlier in chapter 1, half and half. Half merits and half the opposite of merits. So he's going to explain a Beinani is really the essence of what we are, our objective. But be at tzaddik, that needs a blessing from above. Rasha, Tevle, is more or less the status quo, the default that we're at. And a Beinani is going to explain is something that's in our power, and this is going to be why it's Sefer Shel Beinani, Midas Kol Adam V'Acharei Kol Adam Yimshach, as he's going to say later in chapter 14. This is the quality that each of us is capable of. This is what we're capable of being. What? Our faculties, the two kings remain inactive, that there's a battle. But the thought, speech, and action of the Beinani is someone totally under control of the divine soul. So now it's another category here. Not just that the divine soul is dominating or the animal soul, that the faculties of the animal soul can be active, but you don't allow them to affect you. You don't allow them to be expressed in your life. And that's going to be the Beinani. And from that we'll learn something that we're all capable of achieving. So the Rosh V'Tevlei is more or less the default state. The Tzaddik is a unique level that we discussed. And the Beinani is going to be the thing we aspire to. But that we'll learn already inside once we get to the next chapter. So with that we conclude chapter 11. It's interesting also, chapter 10, as I mentioned, Misper HaShalom, it's the complete number. Kedusha is always 10. Sarah Mamoris, Nivra Elam, the 10 statements that God created the world, Aseres HaDibros, the 10 commandments, 10 faculties. 10 is Misper HaShalom, the complete Misper. Yud Aleph, so Kabbalah Chassidus explains, is the 11th is the Makif. The Makif of Levena, of the Yud Aleph Samamoni Akteres, the incense, that refers to Klippus, is in the number 11, because there's Keser, there's a Makif, because it's not Beprimius. In the Yud, in the 10 and not 9 and not 11, like he says in Sefer Yetzirah, there's a complete cycle. There's the Edison Kalim and the Primis Dikaway. 11 is already something as Makif, like he concluded the chapter, fitting very much to the chapter number, chapter 11, the chapter about the Rosh. And then for chapter 12, we're going to go into the Beinani. And with that, we'll stop here. This has been Tanya Applied. Please go to tanyaapplied.com. You can hear all these programs. We're already in the 102nd program. As well as pose any questions. Everyone have a good tevach. And a good Chedesh Nissen, Benissen Nigalu, Benissen Asin Legoel, especially in fulfilling Mashiach's words to the Baal Shem Tov, Kishia Futza Meinasecha Chutza, Osimar do Malka Mashiach. Mashiach will come when we spread the well springs of Torah, of Chassidus, to the outskirts, to the farthest corners of the world. Good tevach.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChassidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.